The tray hit her face before she even sat down. Hot soup, orange grease. It ran down Josephine Calloway's forehead, over her closed eyes, and dripped off her chin onto the gray prison jumpsuit. The whole cafeteria went silent. 200 inmates stopped chewing at once. Renata Cole stood over her, empty tray still tilted. A smile stretched across her face like she'd been waiting all week for this moment.
Welcome to Fairhaven, new girl. This is my table.
Jo didn't move. She didn't wipe her face. She didn't blink. Guards near the wall watched but didn't step in. One of them, a heavy-set man with a name tag that read Draven, smirked and looked away, like he'd seen this show before and enjoyed it. Jo's hands rested flat on the table. Under the skin of those hands were 15 years of judo training, the last 3 at Olympic level, a gold medal buried in a storage unit in Ohio, and enough controlled strength to break Renata Cole's wrist in under 2 seconds. She didn't do it. She picked up a napkin, wiped one eye, and said, "Okay," in a voice so calm, 2 women at the next table put down their forks. Renata's smile faltered. Just a flicker. That okay wasn't fear. It wasn't submission. It was patience. She walked off laughing, and the room laughed with her. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 2 hours later, in the narrow corridor between the laundry room and the yard door, one of 3 blind spots on the block that never made it onto any maintenance request, because Draven was the one who'd requested the cameras stay broken there. 3 of Renata's crew boxed Jo in against the wall. "You embarrassed her by not crying," said the biggest one, a woman named Cass with a shaved head and a jailhouse tattoo climbing her neck. "That's worse than fighting back." Jo kept her hands loose at her sides. "I don't want trouble." Too late. The other 2 closed the gap on either side, boxing her tighter against the wall, one of them close enough that Jo could smell the cafeteria soup still on her jumpsuit. Cass grabbed Jo's wrist to yank her forward. It happened before Jo decided to let it happen. Her body moved on its own, a small rotation of the arm, a drop of the elbow, and Cass's grip broke apart like it had never closed at all. Cass stumbled half a step, off balance, blinking, unable to explain what had just happened to her own hand. Jo froze. She hadn't meant to do that. 11 months of discipline, and her body had just answered a threat the way 15 years of training had wired it to. Automatic, before thought. The 2 other women went still, watching Cass rub her wrist. "Sorry," Jo said quietly, stepping back, hands raised, offering nothing else. Reflex. Cass laughed it off for the others' benefit, calling her a freak, telling her she got lucky. But her eyes said something different. So did the eyes of the 3rd woman in the corridor, the one standing slightly apart from the others, arms crossed, watching Jo with the sharp, unreadable focus of someone recalculating everything she thought she knew. Renata Cole hadn't sent them. She'd only heard about it after. But she'd been standing at the end of the hallway the whole time, unseen, and what she'd just watched didn't match anything in Jo's intake file. Nobody breaks a grip like that by accident, Renata thought. Question is, what is she, and why is she hiding it? That night, footsteps stopped outside Jo's cell. A voice through the bars, low, deliberate. "You're not like the others. I've been watching you since intake, and I know exactly who you are. Josephine Calloway." Jo went still. The footsteps walked away before she could see a face. Before we continue, where in the world are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss tomorrow's episode. Jo didn't sleep. She ran through every guard, every inmate, every intake worker who'd processed her 3 days earlier, and came up with nothing. Someone in this building knew her real name, not the alias her lawyer had arranged, the actual one. Josephine Calloway. Olympic gold. A face she'd spent a week disguising with a bad dye job and a razor-thin scar cut into her own eyebrow the night before sentencing. At breakfast, a woman slid onto the bench across from her without asking. Young, sharp-eyed, forearms lined with faded tattoos. "I'm Priya Nasser. You made an enemy on day 1 and walked away from a fight in a hallway with no cameras 20 minutes later. That's either really stupid or really smart. Which do you think it is?" "I think you could have broken that woman's wrist and chose not to." Priya leaned in. "Renata runs this block because Draven lets her. He looks the other way, she keeps the peace her way. You're her new project now. Watch your food, watch your shower time, watch your back." "Why tell me this?" "Because I used to run this block, before her. I know what it costs to hold that spot. I'm not trying to get it back. I'm just watching who's smart enough to survive it." She stood before Joe could ask her real question. "Do you know who spoke to me last night?" A folded note appeared under Joe's tray at lunch. No one saw who left it. "I know about Denver. I know about the fight you lost on purpose. I know your coach is still out there walking free while you sit in here." Joe's stomach dropped. Only a handful of people alive knew the truth about that match, and none of them should have had a reason to write to her from inside a state prison. Someone in Fairhaven had information that should not exist. Across the cafeteria, Renata was watching her again, not with hate this time, but with something closer to calculation. That afternoon in the yard, Priya found her alone by the fence. "Whatever's in that note, burn it," Priya said. "People who leave paper trails in here are either careless or careful in a way that should scare you." "How do you know about the note?" "Because I watched who dropped it. And I watched who was watching to see if you'd read it." "Who dropped it?" Priya's eyes flicked toward the guard tower, toward Draven, pacing the catwalk above them, phone pressed to his ear, free hand gesturing sharp and fast at nothing, voice low and urgent even from 30 feet away. "Not the who you're thinking," Priya said. "Not now." She walked off toward the fence line, leaving Joe with more questions than she'd started the day with. Joe requested the library that afternoon, one of the few privileges new inmates got fast with a clean record. She needed somewhere quiet to think. Sitting at the terminal, her hands settled automatically into the same loose, ready position they'd held on every mat she'd ever competed on. Weight balanced, fingers relaxed, spine straight. She caught herself doing it and forced her shoulders down. Nearly 4 years earlier, in Denver, she'd stood across from an opponent she could have thrown in 4 seconds. Her coach, Russ Kessler, had told her the night before that she needed to lose. Not badly, just enough. A sponsor deal depended on it, he'd said. He never used the word gambling, but she understood exactly what he meant. She won the match clean anyway. 3 weeks later, federal agents found $40,000 in her gym bag, wired from an account with her name on it. Kessler testified against her with tears in his eyes, claiming she'd asked him to help fix a different match months earlier. No proof except his word. The jury believed a decorated coach over an athlete the tabloids had already decided was difficult. 4 years. She was appealing. Her lawyer said it could take another year just to get a hearing. Now, holding a note with details only Kessler, or someone connected to him, could know, Joe understood something worse. Someone from that world is inside this prison. An older woman near the window caught her eye and looked away too quickly. Mid-50s, gray hair pulled back tight, a compass rose tattoo on her forearm. Joe memorized her face. She didn't recognize her from anywhere in her old life, which made it worse. It meant the threat wasn't personal. It meant Joe was a job. That night, a second note slid under her cell door. "Renata's little sister is 3 cells down from you. Ask Renata why she really runs this block. Ask her what happens to prisoners who talk to the wrong guard." At 11 p.m., the lights buzzed off. In the dark, Joe heard someone crying 2 cells down, then Renata's voice, low and fierce, cutting through the silence. "They're not touching you again. I don't care what it costs me. Joe lay still, listening, and understood that the prison queen wasn't just cruel. She was scared of something bigger than herself, and Joe had just been handed a map pointing straight at it. 2 days later, in the shower block at 5 a.m., the 1 hour with a single guard on rotation and the cameras angled wrong on purpose, 3 inmates Joe had never spoken to came through the steam at once. No warning, no words, just hands, fast, grabbing for her hair and her arms in the dark. Joe's training took over before fear had time to. She dropped low under the first grab, felt knuckles graze the back of her skull instead of connecting clean, and used the second attacker's own momentum to send her into the tile wall with a crack that echoed down the block. The third came in swinging something short and hard wrapped in a towel. Joe caught the arm mid-swing, twisted the wrist until the weapon clattered against the drain, and dropped the woman to one knee without breaking anything. 10 seconds. 3 women down or backing off, and Joe hadn't thrown a single closed fist punch. Every move borrowed leverage, never force. She was breathing hard, more scared of what her body had just revealed than of the fight itself. The lead attacker scrambled up, clutching her wrist, and ran before the guard rounded the corner. Joe found something on the shower floor after they'd gone. A folded $20 bill, dropped in the scramble, with a phone number written on the inside fold in handwriting that wasn't Renata's, wasn't Dana's, wasn't anyone's she recognized. Someone paid them, and it wasn't the queen of this block. That afternoon, Renata cornered her near the commissary, face tight with something that wasn't quite anger. I heard what happened in the shower. Wasn't you, Joe said. It wasn't a question. Renata's jaw shifted, arms crossing tight over her chest. No, and that's the problem. Nobody moves on my block without me knowing first, except somebody just did, twice, in less than a week, and both times it was aimed at you. She studied Joe, the same calculating look from the hallway 2 days earlier. Cass told me what you did to her wrist. Now 3 more women can't explain how a stranger put them on the floor in under a minute. You want to tell me what you actually are, or should I keep guessing? Not yet, Joe said. Then we've got a problem, Renata said, because somebody's hunting in my house, and I don't know who gave them the invitation. Draven didn't explain himself to anyone. He didn't need to. Power in Fairhaven wasn't spoken. It moved through small, quiet violences nobody could prove. That night, in the records office, he pulled Joe's intake file and deleted 2 lines from her visitor log before printing it clean. He made a phone call from the stairwell where the signal jammer didn't reach, voice flat. She's harder to move than we thought. Give me the week. He found the guard who'd let a note slip past the mail screening, a young officer named Reyes, barely 6 months on the job, and backed him into the supply closet, one forearm braced against the doorframe, close enough that Reyes had nowhere to retreat but the shelving at his back. You're going to forget you ever saw that envelope, Draven said, voice pleasant, almost friendly, which was worse than shouting. Or your file gets a very bad Tuesday in it. Drugs go missing on your watch. Contraband turns up in your locker. Your choice how this week goes. Reyes nodded fast, throat working, and said nothing to anyone for 3 days. Priya noticed the pattern before Joe did. Cell searches that hit only Joe's row, a shift change that put Draven's own men on Joe's block for the first time in a month. Commissary items disappearing off Joe's account, like someone was trying to starve her into a mistake. He's boxing you in, Priya told her during laundry rotation, isolating you a little at a time so nobody notices all at once. I've watched him do it before, right before someone disappears off this block on paperwork that doesn't exist anywhere else. Disappears how? Priya didn't answer right away. She just handed Joe a folded towel with something small pressed inside it, the same way she'd pass information for the rest of the week, never in words she'd have to repeat later. Ask Dana, Priya said. 2 cells down. She knows exactly how it happens. She's been watching it happen to other people for a year. Joe learned the sister's name that week. Dana Cole, 19 years old, serving 18 months for a robbery charge that felt, from the whispers, like it belonged to someone else's crime. Dana didn't eat in the cafeteria. Renata brought food to her directly, trading favors to make it happen. Draven allowed it, and Draven never allowed anything without a price. On laundry duty, Joe finally got close enough to speak. "Renata told me not to talk to you," Dana said, folding towels with shaking hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble. Everybody says that right before they do." Dana glanced at the door, then lowered her voice. "You got a note. I got one too, before you ever arrived. Told me my sister's protection has a price, and one day the bill comes due. Setting the price how?" Dana's eyes went to the doorway again. Real fear this time, the kind that doesn't fake well. "I can't. Not here." She left a folded towel behind on her way out, something small pressed inside it. A photograph. Grainy, smuggled paper. Draven at a restaurant table, shaking hands with a man Joe recognized instantly, even years later and 30 pounds heavier. Russ Kessler. Her coach, her betrayer. Joe's hands went cold. The threats weren't separate at all. The man who framed her outside these walls, and someone inside working for him. On the back of the photo, unfamiliar handwriting. "Ask why Kessler needs Fairhaven specifically." Footsteps behind her. She shoved the photo into her waistband just as Renata filled the laundry room doorway, blocking the only exit, eyes hard. "You've been talking to my sister," Renata said. "That was a mistake." "I wasn't looking for trouble," Joe said, weight already balancing evenly between both feet. "Old training, automatic." "You've made 3 people in this shower block explain injuries they can't explain. My sister's talking to a stranger she was told to avoid, and now you're holding something you shouldn't be." Renata's voice was low and dangerous. "Give it to me. I don't think you want to see it." "I don't care what you think." Renata moved fast. A shove meant to pin Joe against the dryers and take the photo by force. Joe redirected instead of resisting, using Renata's own momentum to spin her half a step off balance, never once striking her. Renata recovered instantly and came back harder, a real fighter's instinct, throwing a controlled elbow that Joe barely slipped under a hair's breadth from her jaw. For 8 seconds it was real. Renata's brute, street-trained aggression against Joe's trained precision, neither of them holding back the way they had in the hallway days earlier. Joe caught Renata's next grab, turned it into a throw that could have put her on the concrete hard enough to break something. She stopped it a foot from the ground instead, lowering Renata gently, pinning one arm without pressure, without pain. Control, not damage. Renata went still under the hold, chest heaving, staring up at her. "You could have put me on the floor for real," Renata said. "I didn't want to." Joe let go and stepped back. Renata sat up slowly, rubbing her shoulder, something behind her eyes shifting, suspicion cooling into something closer to respect, though not yet trust. "Who are you?" Renata asked again, quieter this time. Joe pulled the photograph from her waistband and held it out instead of answering. "I know Draven's taking money from a man named Russ Kessler. I know Kessler framed me for a crime that doesn't exist. Your sister is scared of something bigger than block politics." A pause. "I think we're both being used by the same people, from 2 different directions." Renata took the photo with shaking hands and stared at it for a long time, thumb pressed hard against the crease like she could stop it shaking. "Draven's been feeding money outside for a year," she said quietly. "I thought it was cigarettes and phones. Dana said it was bigger. I didn't want to believe her, because believing her meant admitting I couldn't protect her alone." Before either of them could say more, an alarm blared through the block. Not the routine head count tone, but the sharp shriek reserved for lockdowns. Every door in the block slammed shut at once. Lights cut to red emergency strips. Guards shouted over each other in the corridor, and somewhere down the hall, glass broke. "That's not a drill," Renata said, already moving toward the laundry room door. "Draven only calls real lockdowns when he's covering something up." They found the corridor in chaos. Inmates pressed against locked cell doors, an actual fistfight breaking out near the stairwell between two women who had nothing to do with any of it. Guards trying to restore order and losing the room by the second. A body slammed into Joe from the side. Not an attack, just panic. A woman shoving blind through the crowd toward a cell that wasn't hers. Joe absorbed the impact and kept moving, ducking under a swinging arm from the stairwell fight, stepping over a dropped meal tray without breaking stride. Renata plowed straight through the same crowd 2 feet to her left, shoulder first, sending 2 inmates stumbling out of her path without slowing down at all. Through the confusion, Joe saw it. A supply closet door standing open at the end of the hall. A door that should have been locked 24 hours a day, with Draven himself shoving a box of files inside it before slamming it shut and jogging away in the opposite direction of the noise he'd almost certainly caused himself. "He's using the lockdown as cover," Joe said. "Moving something. Or destroying something." Renata's face went white. "Dana's cell is 2 doors past that closet." They moved together through the chaos. Renata shoving a path through panicking inmates with blunt force. Joe slipping through the same crowd almost soundlessly, both of them converging on Dana's cell from opposite ends of the hallway at the same moment. Dana was there, shaken but untouched, pressed into the corner of her cell, staring at the door like she expected it to open on someone other than her sister. "Someone tried the lock twice," Dana said, voice shaking, "during the alarm. Before the guards even got here." Renata's hands were fists at her sides. "Who?" "I didn't see a face, just gloves. And boots. Guard boots." The lockdown lifted 20 minutes later, with no official explanation on the board. The supply closet, when Joe checked it hours later during yard time, was locked again, empty and freshly wiped down. No dust, no fingerprints, nothing left to prove what Draven had carried in or out. But Joe had seen the box, and she had seen the boots on the man who'd tried Dana's door. They matched. Later that night, Joe went looking for the guard who'd been on Dana's hallway during the lockdown and found him gone from the roster entirely, reassigned to a different wing effective that morning. No explanation logged, his name simply gone from the next day's shift sheet like he'd never worked the block at all. When she asked Priya about it, Priya just shook her head. "That's how he does it," Priya said. "Not fired, not disciplined, moved somewhere quiet before he can say anything to anyone. I've watched 3 guards disappear off this roster the same way in 2 years. None of them ever came back to explain themselves." 2 nights later, in the yard after dark, 3 men in guard uniforms Joe didn't recognize moved toward the laundry building with the deliberate, unhurried pace of people who believed no one would ask them to explain themselves. Joe was already outside, restless, unable to sleep since the lockdown. She saw them before they saw her, and she saw where they were headed, straight for Renata, who was crossing the yard alone toward the block door, 20 feet from the nearest camera's blind spot. Joe didn't think. She moved. "Renata, behind you." Renata spun as the first man closed the distance, swinging something short and heavy. She took the hit on her forearm instead of her skull, grunted, and drove her shoulder into his ribs with the raw, relentless force of someone who'd fought her whole life without a single lesson in how to do it clean. The second man went for Joe. She sidestepped his first swing, used his own weight to redirect him into the fence, and put him down with a controlled throw that left him gasping but breathing. The third came at both of them together, and for the first time, Joe and Renata fought as a single unit without planning it. Renata drawing his attention with a wild, aggressive feint that forced him to overcommit. Joe sweeping his balance out from under him a half-second later, precise where Renata was raw, each of them filling the gap the other left open. He swung wide at Renata's head. She caught the blow on a raised forearm and answered with a knee that folded him at the waist, and Joe finished it, driving him face first into the fence hard enough to rattle the chain link the length of the yard. He hit the ground hard. Didn't get up right away. Draven's voice cut across the yard floodlights, furious, arriving 30 seconds too late to matter. "Stand down! What is this? Ask your men," Renata shouted back, chest heaving, blood at her lip. "Ask them who sent them to jump me 20 feet from a blind spot you know about." The three attackers scattered before real guards arrived, melting into the dark at the yard's edge, credentials fake enough that no one could later confirm which shift they'd claimed to be working. Renata turned to Joe in the sudden quiet, breathing hard, blood on her knuckles, something in her face that hadn't been there an hour earlier. "You didn't have to help me. You didn't order the shower," Joe said. "I know that now. Somebody's trying to make it look like we're enemies so we never compare notes. It's working, until tonight." Renata looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. The first real trust either of them had offered the other since a soup tray had started all of it. "Then we compare notes," Renata said, "starting now." 2 days later, Draven appeared in the laundry room doorway with a folder and 2 guards Joe had never seen before, wearing uniforms that didn't quite match anyone else's on the block. Josephine Calloway. "You're being transferred. Effective immediately." "Transferred where?" "Federal holding. Above my pay grade to explain. Pack your things." Renata stepped between them, and Draven's eyes went cold. "You've caused enough trouble," he told her. "Step aside, or you're next." "Try it," Renata said. The 2 unfamiliar guards moved to flank Joe, hands reaching for her arms, one of them closing a hand around her bicep hard enough to bruise before she'd decided whether to let him. Joe's mind raced faster than her body. A federal transfer with no warning, no lawyer notified, arranged 2 days after Draven's men had failed in the yard. This wasn't procedure. This was cleanup. "They're not transferring me. They're removing a problem. I want my lawyer," Joe said, loud enough for the whole hallway, loud enough for witnesses. "You'll get a call at intake," Draven said, already turning away. As the guards pulled her through the block, Priya appeared at the end of the hallway, drawn by the noise. "That's not a real transfer," she said to anyone who'd listen. "Real transfers don't happen 2 days after an assault report with no warden sign-off on the board." She pulled the morning roster from her sleeve and started reading it aloud, building a witness trail in real time. Renata caught Joe's eyes across the corridor. No words this time, just a nod, sharper and more certain than the one in the yard 2 nights earlier. Outside, a windowless van waited, engine running. No federal markings, no visible paperwork. 2 men whose uniforms didn't match any agency Joe recognized from 3 years of legal proceedings. She stopped 3 feet from the van door. "This isn't a federal transfer." One guard's hand moved to his waistband. That was the moment 11 months of restraint ended completely. Joe moved before the guard's hand cleared his waistband. Her palm caught his wrist, twisted, and used his own momentum to drop him face first into the gravel. A clean judo throw, full speed, full precision, the exact move that had won her a gold medal, and the exact move she'd spent 11 months hiding inside Fairhaven's walls. The second guard lunged, reaching for the baton at his belt a half-second too late. Joe pivoted low, hooked his ankle, sent him crashing into the van's open door hard enough to dent the metal. A third came from behind the van, someone she hadn't accounted for, and got an arm around her throat before she could turn. For one dangerous second, real panic flared through her, her feet scrambling for the leverage this attacker had denied her, his forearm crushing tighter, her vision starting to narrow at the edges. Then she found it. A drop of her weight. A stomp on his instep that made him flinch just enough. A wrenching pivot that broke the hold and sent him stumbling into the gravel beside the other two, gasping as hard as she was. She was breathing hard, favoring one shoulder, blood at her lip from an elbow she hadn't fully dodged, one knee scraped raw from the gravel. Not untouchable, not invincible, just faster, better trained, and unwilling to stop. Real alarms started screaming across the whole facility. Draven arrived at the yard's edge, fury and panic fighting for space on his face. "Stand down. Ask them who sent them," Joe shouted, chest heaving over 3 groaning men. "Ask them why a federal transfer showed up with no paperwork." Fairhaven's actual guards swarmed the yard, weapons raised, uncertain who exactly they were supposed to be stopping. Renata appeared at the blocked doorway, Dana half hidden behind her, both staring at Joe standing over 3 men like she'd stepped out of a different life entirely. "Judo," Renata breathed. "You're the Olympic girl, the one they said fixed a match." "I never fixed anything," Joe said. "Kessler did. Draven's been helping him clean it up from the inside." Warden Alvarez arrived with state troopers close behind, boots crunching over the gravel where 3 men still lay groaning, and the truth started unraveling fast. The fake guards carried no real credentials. One, cuffed and bleeding, started talking the second Alvarez mentioned attempted kidnapping charges. He named Draven. He named a payment. He named a man on the outside who wanted the judo case, gone before her appeal reached a courtroom. Draven ran. He didn't get far. Renata stuck her foot out as he passed the doorway, and he went down hard, exactly like Joe's first attacker had minutes earlier. "That's for every debt you put on my sister," Renata said, standing over him. Troopers cuffed him in the dirt while the entire yard watched. Inmates pressed against the fence, guards frozen mid-motion. Fairhaven's whole power structure collapsing in under 4 minutes. Somewhere behind her, Joe heard Priya's voice cutting through the noise, already telling anyone who'd listen exactly how long she'd waited for this. They kept Joe in a holding room while the yard was secured. An hour later, the door opened. Not a guard, but the woman with the compass rose tattoo. "Marguerite Okafor, Federal. I wrote the notes." Joe stood. "You knew this whole time? I needed you to find it yourself." Marguerite set a thin folder on the table. 3 names, 3 dates, 3 transfers, with no paper trail. "Kessler's not the top of this. He's a name on a wire transfer. Somebody above him ordered you removed before your appeal reached a judge. That person is still out there." The door slammed open. A guard, real, panicked. "Ms. Okafor, the evidence room. Someone's inside it, and the fire alarm on that floor's been cut." They ran. Marguerite hit the door first, badge raised. A man in a maintenance jumpsuit stood over an open evidence box, lighter already open in one hand, papers doused from a bottle at his feet, smoke already curling up from the folder in his other hand. "Don't," Marguerite said. He lit the corner of a folder anyway, threw it, and bolted for the loading dock, shouldering past a cart of files hard enough to send it crashing into the shelving. Joe went after him. He hit the corridor at a dead sprint, weaving between shelving units, throwing a fire extinguisher behind him that Joe cleared in one stride without breaking pace. He slammed the loading dock door open and took the metal stairs 2 at a time, boots ringing on the grating. Panic makes mistakes. He misjudged the last step, and Joe closed the gap in that half second, hooking his ankle mid-stride and driving him down onto the concrete hard enough that the air left his lungs in one ragged cough. She had his arm pinned behind him before he found the breath to fight back, her knee braced against his shoulder, her voice low and even. "Stay down. You don't want the next part." He stayed down. Marguerite arrived seconds later, most of the box saved, the room still smoking. The man had no ID, no badge, a contractor on Fairhaven's maintenance logs twice before. Both times the week an inmate's file mysteriously went missing. "Somebody sent him," Joe said, chest heaving. "Somebody who knew what was in that box before we did." Marguerite's face was grim. "Somebody who's still making calls." 2 days later, a man Joe didn't recognize fell into step behind Priya in the parking lot. Too close, murmuring something that made her go rigid. Joe crossed the lot fast. "Problem?" His eyes flicked to her, recalculating. "Just talking. Talk somewhere else." He held her stare a second too long, then walked off unhurried, the way people walk when they want you to know they're not afraid. Priya's hands were shaking. "He knew my name, knew I testify Thursday. Told me to remember how long memories run around here." "You're not testifying alone," Joe said. Priya steadied herself, then managed a thin smile. 2 years of evidence, and it still comes down to someone trying to scare me out of a hallway. Didn't work the first time. Inside, she handed investigators 19 months of dates hidden inside library book covers. The backbone of the case, according to Detective Sarah Whitlock, the state investigator who'd taken lead the day of the fake transfer. The man in the parking lot never came back, but somebody had sent him. And that somebody now knew Priya's name, Joe's face, and how close the case had gotten. The evidence moved fast once nobody could burn it. Draven's accounts. A shell company. 3 years of deposits. The same account that once put $40,000 in Joe's gym bag. Kessler's name on the wire transfers. Recruiter, not architect. Arrested mid-lesson in Colorado, in front of 6 students who had no idea what their coach really was. 2 names traded for a lighter sentence, leading to a Miami broker who'd never touched a mat, but had made millions betting against athletes he'd helped ruin. And buried under all of it, a routing number that belonged to no one in custody. Whitlock slid the printout across the table. Somebody wired Kessler his first payment 4 years ago. Same somebody wired the man who torched our evidence room his gas money. No name yet. But you're close. Close enough that whoever it is knows we're looking. Her jaw tightened. Which means you're still a target until we do. By the 6th week, the state had enough for an emergency hearing. Thursday, with an unnamed threat still circling somewhere outside the frame. The gray sedan picked her up 2 blocks from the safe house Whitlock had arranged, and it was still there 4 turns later, holding back just far enough to look like nothing. Joe didn't slow down. She cut through a parking garage instead of around it, took the stairwell instead of the elevator, and came out a side exit onto a street the sedan couldn't have anticipated without already knowing where she was going. It found her anyway, idling half a block up when she reached the corner. She walked straight at it instead of away. The window rolled down an inch, just enough for her to see a driver in sunglasses who didn't flinch when she got close, didn't reach for anything, just watched her with the flat patience of someone who'd been told to observe, not engage. She memorized the plate before he pulled away, unhurried, merging into traffic like he had nowhere in particular to be. Whitlock ran it that night. The plate belonged to a rental company, leased under a name that led to an address that didn't exist. A dead end, Joe said. A professional dead end, Whitlock corrected. Amateurs don't know how to build those. Whoever's above Kessler isn't scrambling. They're managing you. She set the printout down. Which means the hearing on Thursday isn't just about clearing your name anymore. It's about making this loud enough that managing you stops being an option. The hearing took less than 2 hours. Joe's attorney, Elena Marsh, laid out the trail in 9 minutes flat. The judge took off his glasses. "Ms. Calloway, the court failed you the first time. Vacated. On the spot." Outside, cameras flashed in a wall of light. Joe hadn't stood in for years. A reporter shoved past a security barrier trying to get a microphone closer, and for half a second the whole crowd surged with him, bodies pressing in, a barrier clattering sideways, until 2 officers muscled the line back and Marsh pulled Joe bodily toward the waiting car. Joe answered exactly one question in the scramble and pushed through the rest. She almost missed him. A man in a gray coat, standing very still at the edge of the courthouse steps, watching her the way a hunter watches something he hasn't decided to shoot yet. The moment she looked directly at him, he turned into the crowd and was gone before the driver pulled her door shut. "You know him?" Marsh asked, following her gaze. "No," Joe said, "but I think he knows me." An envelope was waiting at her hotel that night, slid under the door by hand, no postmark. Inside, a photograph of Joe walking out of the courthouse that afternoon. On the back, 4 words in handwriting she'd never seen before. "This isn't finished, champion." 2 officers were posted outside her door within the hour. Marguerite arrived not long after, studying the photo under the lamp. "Same handwriting as the Fairhaven notes?" "No," Marguerite said. "Different hand. More than one person working for whoever's above Kessler." She set it down carefully. "You didn't just expose a guard and a washed-up coach. You started pulling on something with more than 2 hands holding the rope. So what now? Now we go public before they can go quiet. The bigger this gets, the harder it is to make you disappear without everyone asking why." Joe stared at the photograph long after Marguerite left. Somewhere out there, a man in a gray coat already knew where she slept. She didn't sleep that night either. She visited Fairhaven once more before leaving the state. A guest now, not an inmate. Renata met her in the visiting room. "Dana's out next month," Renata said. "Priya testifies Thursday. It's finally moving." "Somebody left a photo of me outside my hotel last night," Joe said. "Whoever's above Kessler isn't finished." Renata's face went hard. "Then neither are you." "No, I've got a title to take back, not just a medal." Renata almost smiled. "The real kind." "Do me a favor. Next time somebody dumps soup on you, don't be so calm about it." Joe laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in longer than she could remember. "Deal." She walked out through Fairhaven's front gate into afternoon sunlight, past guards who now knew exactly who she was. Dana had pressed a folded note into her hand before the guards called time. Joe read it in the parking lot. "Come back for the parole hearing. Bring a throw that'll make the room remember it." She scanned the lot out of habit now, a new instinct she hadn't needed a week ago. No gray coat. No stillness that didn't belong. Just afternoon light and an empty parking lot. She didn't look back at the building. 11 months of restraint had ended in a prison yard. Somewhere out there, a man who'd photographed her outside a courthouse was still deciding what came next. Joe decided to get there first. The mat felt firmer than she remembered, or maybe she'd just changed. Joe stood at the edge of the competition floor in Denver, the same city where Kessler first told her to lose on purpose. A year had passed. Kessler. 6 years. Wire fraud and racketeering. The Miami broker. A plea deal and 2 more names now facing federal charges. Draven. Still awaiting trial, still refusing to name the man in the gray coat, though 3 weeks earlier, federal agents had finally put a name to that routing number. A sealed indictment was waiting on one more piece of evidence before it dropped. Renata sat with Dana in the stands, both clean, both rebuilding. Priya sat behind them, released after her testimony helped convict 2 more corrections staff. Marguerite stood near the entrance, her real name on a badge now, watching the doors the way she always had. Like the job wasn't finished, because it wasn't. The referee called Joe's name. The whistle blew. Her opponent came in fast, testing her with a grip fight, both hands snapping for the collar. Joe broke the grip, circled once, and felt the old rhythm come back into her feet like it had never left. When the opening came, she took it clean. A hip throw, full rotation, no hesitation, no restraint held back this time, because there was nothing left to hide. 4 seconds later, her opponent hit the mat, and the crowd came up out of their seats. In a roar she felt more than heard. She'd told Renata she had a title to take back. She hadn't been talking about a medal. Afterward, Renata grinned at her the way she never had inside Fairhaven's walls. "Still think I should have been scared of you on day one. You picked the wrong weapon," Joe said. "Soup doesn't scare an Olympic champion. It just gets her paying attention." Marguerite's phone buzzed once. She read it without changing expression, the kind of stillness Joe had learned to recognize as "this matters." "Sealed indictment just went active," Marguerite said quietly, for Joe alone. "Gray Coat has a name now. Joe didn't ask for it yet." There would be time for that fight too. Right now, the crowd was still on its feet, and for the first time in over a year, that was enough. Some storms end quiet. Some end standing in the middle of a mat with your own name called out over a loudspeaker, and one more storm already gathering on the horizon. 2 more amazing stories are waiting for you on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, tap the next video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. And before you go, tell me your city or country in the comments. I'd love to know where you're watching from.